Hello and welcome to this week's review on the My Hero Academia Vigilantes manga. This week I'm reviewing the episode titled Rain and Cloud, and we kick off this review as we always do with these reviews by talking about the positives and the headline positives, the big things I'm discussing over the course of this review. I thought the opening for this week's episode was charming. I enjoyed the design work for the younger Irizawa and his friends, and I like the subtext with the stray cat. So as hinted by the cover to this particular volume, we're going back in time to learn about the personal history and backstory of Irizawa, otherwise known as Eraserhead. Now, I'd known that something like this was coming for quite some time through spoilers, however the details were very, very vague. I don't exactly know where all this is going. I could hazard a few guesses, and as far as the spoilers are concerned, it was just, oh, there's going to be a storyline where it's going to focus on him for a little while, and that's pretty much the beginning and the end of it. Like, in the grand scheme of spoilers that I've received for this series, that's right down on the lower half of it. Like, it's like saying, oh, there's going to be an episode where they're going to play baseball or something. It's just such a nothingness as far as spoilers are concerned, so I'm not that worried about it. But still, regardless, this is an episode that's going to kick off a storyline that's going to focus mostly around Irizawa and his friends, so it would be silly for me to complain about the lack of an appearance and the absence of Crawler during this episode and for the remainder of this storyline, because, let's face it, he's not going to have that much of a presence in what's going to happen unless he somehow discovers a time machine. Though with that said, we will be discussing about his placement with all of this in a later point in this video series. Well, of course, we aren't totally devoid of Crawler-related adventures here, as we do get that fun opening sequence of him being chased by a big bad wolf. It's the kind of goofy fun that I'd expect from this series. It's the kind of thing that I wished they'd lean a little bit more of within the main series, because there does, as I mentioned in the past, there comes a certain point where the wackiness and the randomness of quirks stop mattering, and at a certain point, it all just becomes rather typical anime designs and character abilities. Whereas here, what do we get? We get a guy that looks like the big bad wolf chasing after a little girl who's got a little kitten in a box. Like, it's cute, it's goof, it's silly. Yes, it is a largely throwaway moment, save for the cat, but we'll get onto that later. But there is a charm here, and both in the way that it's put together, but also the way it's drawn and designed, and the whole construction of it. It really does feel like a throwback towards the start of this series, back in the Mr. Nice Guy era, where Crawler was just helping people out. His lot in the life of being a hero was just helping people with minor things. It just happened that here that, well, he got in over his head once again. You know, he just found a little girl with a kitten and wanted to help them. And then the big bad wolf guy shows up and he gets in over his head and needs saving, because he always does. Now, I don't mind this kind of stuff too much. I don't mind the fact they ended up needing to be saved again by a different character, as ultimately this whole sequence of events is cute and fun, and it does set up for some interesting visual metaphors that we will end up getting to later on. Like, it isn't a total goof around, there is some purpose to all of this, but it's still presented well for what it is. In the immediate run-up before that, we get to the phone call with Eraserhead and Midnight talking, and she's trying to encourage him to consider going to work at UA. Great stuff. Fantastic, great insight as to where exactly they are in their own personal journey at this moment. All of this, particularly the stuff with the chase secrets of the big bad wolf, and that is presented in a way which is very expressive, very cartoony, with some of the way that the characters design, their reactions and what have you. It is just brilliant. It is a nice contrast with the more serious stuff that comes in the later half of this episode. It creates a better sense of a time change. Granted, the overall design work isn't that different to what we end up getting with the rest of the series more broadly, and it's not as though we're going to get something quite as stark when it comes to an anime, but nonetheless, it does give us a sense that we are in a very different era, as well as, well, it gives us an idea of just how deep the memories are for Irizawa. Like, the cat is a good example of this. When we see it in the present, the cat design is rather cartoonish and silly, whereas when we go back into the past, there's far more detail there, because he was always really thinking back on this, and because of just how important that particular cat and that particular moment in their history is. And this all sets up for some thematic foreshadowing we get later on. Had this the entire episode just been focused around Crawler trying to deal with this wolf villain, I'd been fine with that. Even if at the end of the day it ends the same way, it's the kind of goofy fun I can't help but enjoy. It's the kind of thing that I do wish was in this series more, or at the very least in the main series more. But nonetheless, it ends up pivoting to the heart of the episode and what is seemingly going to be the remaining focus for the remainder of this volume, as well as part of the next one as well, which is the personal history of Irozawa. The kick-off point for this is, of course, him chewing out Crawler for not thinking through adopting this kitten or looking after it for a little while. Though, to be fair, it's fair to say that Crawler doesn't think through most things to begin with, but it does almost feel rather out of character to a certain degree that Irozawa is doing this, but not out of character in a bad way. It's out of character in a way that we're seeing a side of him that we haven't really seen before, both in the main series and here. And the reason why he's acting that way is something that we start to get explained to us over the course of this episode. Well, shown to us more than explained. Is something that will be elaborated upon, no doubt, as we go forward. We get the transition from the cartoony cat to the more realistic-looking one. We go from designs a little bit more expressive and cartoonish to ones that are more serious and focused. Again, I don't think there would be this major shift in design within the main series or within the anime. Though with that said, even still here, it's not a major shift or anything. It's just a neat thing that we go from some rather bright, colourful, bouncy-looking manga art to something that's a lot more serious and studious, which makes sense given what we're getting into at this point in the story. Now, whilst this isn't the first time that we've seen a younger version of Eraserhead or Present Mike, this is the first time that we're getting to see them and interact with them for a greater extended period of time. And also, it's the longest that we've seen the pair of them at this point in their lives being together. Like, whenever we've seen younger versions of Eraserhead and Present Mike, it's just been for short gag moments, whereas here, we're going to get a lot more of them. Though, to be fair, it's still early doors, and I think that the Cloud guy, I forget their name, I've not had a chance to remember it yet, becomes the teleporter guy later on in the main series. But we'll soon see where all that ends up going because of the fact that, well, sometimes I'm wrong with these things. But this is an episode, this half of the episode is very much about establishing the characters that we're going to get for this part of the story, and I think it does that stuff very well. To be fair, we already know about the personalities of Eraserhead and Present Mike. We also have some kind of understanding of their friendship around this time period, but we're now seeing that friendship and those personalities being developed to a greater extent, which I'm really interested in seeing. I want to see exactly how these characters were at this point in their lives, and exactly how they can develop going forward to make them into the heroes and such that we know them in the present. And I do imagine that there'll be a certain segment of this upcoming storyline which will be focused around Present Mike and their Cloud friend trying to help Eraserhead come out of their shell more, being supportive of him in the way that Present Mike and Midnight are trying to help do with him in the present day, with trying to encourage him to become a teacher at UA. The design work for Eraserhead and Present Mike are great. We've seen this kind of design for these two characters before in the main series, but I will give credit where credit is due. They do actually look like younger versions of themselves, rather than just versions of themselves that are just smaller or clean-shaven or have slightly shorter hair. You know the kind of deal. You've seen it 101 different ways in different series, whether they are anime, manga, cartoon or comic book, where we have these flashback sequences to characters at earlier points in their lives, and they either don't look that much different for reasons that you could speculate on, or they look so remotely different and not a single thing like their present version that it's hard to see how the hell they became them in the first place. But here, that isn't the case. They genuinely do look like younger versions of themselves, and they're presented in a way which does make them feel like they're authentically earlier versions of themselves, that they're a younger version of themselves, that helps to illustrate how they have changed physically and mentally from this state to the state that we know them in, or in some cases how they've remained the same in certain regards. Now, to be fair, this is a series that is focused around student superheroes, so I'd be surprised if they struggle to pull off a good design here. But you do get an indication, you do get a good feeling of who these characters are, how old they're supposed to be, and again with it all feeling like they aren't just some kind of, I don't know, facsimile, some echo, some photocopied version of their future self. Like they do look like a genuinely younger version of themselves, which I have to give credit to. I know it might seem weird to credit that so hard as I'm doing, but I've seen plenty enough comic books and cartoons and TV series where they'll try and do a younger version of a main character, and it'll either look nothing like them, or alternatively will just look like they've taken the normal version of them and made them a little bit small and made their eyes a little bit bigger to indicate they're a little bit younger. Whereas here that isn't the case. It's great, it's well done, and I'm not going to keep going around this because it feels like someone's going to get onto a circle on. But we see that this is very much an earlier version of Eraserhead. He's someone who is almost totally lacking in confidence. It isn't stated at this point whether he knows what his quirk is, or if he simply doesn't see value in it, which is certainly a fascinating thing given just how overpowered his quirk really is, but nonetheless he doesn't see himself as being able to be a hero at all. This is a contrast with Crawler, who, even though he got wrapped up in helping Knuckleduster fairly early on, even before then he was trying to be a hero in his own way on a very local level when he was doing the Misty Nice Guy stuff of helping old women across the street and basically doing the kind of stuff that past Eraserhead was struggling with. Like, had Crawler come across a little kitten in a box, he probably would have spent his entire afternoon trying to save that little thing and make sure he had the best hecking life possible, whereas Eraserhead just can't do that. He doesn't save the kitten, not because he doesn't want to, but because he doesn't think that he can. Because he doesn't want to be seen. He is very much something of a loner and then some. That is true of him in the main series and from what we know of him in the present, but this is an earlier point where that loneliness, that hermit-like attitude that he has is a lot more toxic. Oh yeah, sure, he could call up an animal shelter and help get the kitten there and then get a bollocking for missing Skull for a little bit, but that means being a hero, and that means being seen. It means having to be like All Might or indeed any other hero, making himself visual, making himself present, making himself someone who has to be seen, who has to be noticed, and he doesn't want that because he's a very withdrawn, reclusive, and introverted person. And when you're that kind of person, when you have that kind of personality, you are frightened to death of being the centre of attention. You don't want people seeing you or noticing you. You want to be kept well away from everything and anything, so you hide yourself in the background. And for him to do this stuff, even though he's not exactly going to get a parade or anything for doing it, he's going to get a lot of attention thrown at him that he's really not comfortable with. And that's what's holding him back from being a hero, and in other areas as well, but we'll discuss, I suppose, at a later point. His reluctance to, his reclusiveness, I should say, his introverted personality is very believable and authentic, as it is a way that a teenager would react to in situations like this, during a period in their life like this, regardless of whether they live in a superhero society or not. I'm sure that many people listening to this will have memories of being this kind of reclusive, this kind of introverted. Even the most extroverted amongst us will have had periods in our teenage years where we just want the world to go away for a little bit and we just don't want to be seen by anybody. So for him to be in this state, for him to act like this, feels authentic. It feels like something a genuine teenager would genuinely go through, and it helps to give us an insight as to who they really are deep down in this moment in their life, because they are so terrified of being seen in any capacity, being noticed, being identified, that the best that they can do to try and save a kitten is not knock on a door and say, hey, can you help with this, or get his phone out and call for someone. It's to just leave an umbrella behind and hope for the best. And that is tragic but relatable for many people, and it is something that is no doubt will be expanding upon, elaborated upon, and explored as this storyline goes along to get them to the state that we know them in the main series. And this is presented rather fascinatingly, because that stray cat represents Eraserhead and Crawler. In the past, we see Eraserhead at his most introverted. We see him at his most emotionally reclusive. We see him at its most withdrawn. We've had hints of that within the main series with the short flashbacks of him in the past that we have seen, and we're seeing it now elaborated upon. He isn't just the quiet, slightly emo guy. He is someone whose introverted nature is toxic and is actively harming him and his mental health. And yet, he has been adopted by more extroverted people to help him come out of his shell and to support him more, as his friends are trying to do, not just at this point in the story, but also within the present, within the future, where they're trying to encourage him to become a teacher at UA. And given how things are likely to go with his cloud friend, I dare say that there is a feeling of guilt that Iwasawa has for being the stray, that had he not been adopted by Present Mike and this other guy, that things would have gone differently. So when he's telling Crawler to not get involved with this stray kitten that he's found, subconsciously he's telling him not to get involved with people like him, not to bring those kind of people into your life, and just to look after yourself and just try to be yourself. And that's tragic because he holds this level of guilt and shame around himself, but given the trauma of all of it, that's just how he has to process things. And that stray cat, both the one in the past and the present, also represents Crawler, because he is a figure without an owner, without a mentor, or without some kind of figure to really guide him. Yes, he's got All Might, but All Might isn't checking in on him once an afternoon to see how he's doing and see how he's getting along. He's just constantly getting himself into trouble, and he's a lot of work to try and look after, but if you look after him, he'll be A-okay, and at the moment Eraserhead sees him as being more trouble than he's worth. I do get the feeling that Eraserhead will end up adopting Crawler to some extent. He will maybe not be the full kind of mentor that maybe Crawler needs, but he will at least look after him and keep an eye out for him in a way that he probably feels ultimately honours the legacy of his lost friend, but done in his own particular way. Like, as we know from the main series, he's not suddenly become this big, gregarious, outgoing personality, but he will at the very least try and be something, to be more of a mentor figure to help Crawler and, in the future, his students to become a better version of themselves. It's all bloody wonderfully put together. Those two little kittens are such a great representation of two of our characters in this series, and to how these characters see themselves, or at least how Eraserhead sees himself in relation to things that have happened in his past, and how he sees Crawler in that similar kind of breath, with it all being to a certain degree rather subconscious. It will be interesting to see how this is all put together when we get to this point in the anime. And on a more self-indulgent moment, there is a part of me that's wondering if this part in the storyline will have its own special opening or not. Like in Jujutsu Kaisen, there is that storyline where we get Gojo and his friends back when they were teenagers, and it had its own special opening music and opening animation, which felt like a 2000s millennial targeted anime, which had its very own distinct look and feel. And I'm interested to see if they take a similar kind of angle with the opening for this part in the series. Like if it ends up feeling like, this is intros for a series for Eraserhead and his friends going on adventures, and this is the second season in their second year, or what have you. Like, I'm interested to see where they end up going with all of this, but I think that it's a rich avenue to explore here, because at the same time, I don't think they'll necessarily go with that, because this is setting up for a very, very dour storyline, almost from the off. And I think the juxtaposition for that might not necessarily work, but nonetheless, given the emotional weight behind it all, we'll see. So, like I say, we'll just see. With that said, let us get into the negatives, and it's only a couple of minor issues. First of all, is I find the designs of the two kittens to be distracting. The first one we get is kind of cartoony and kind of stylized, and the second one is drawn very realistically. And I understand that almost from a subtextual point of view as to why that is the case. The one from the early part in the story is not really drawn with any great detail, because it doesn't really matter in the immediate sense of things. Yes, there is that deeper subtext there with the character, or rather with the kitten I should say, but that same subtext is there for the second kitten, which is far more of a focus in the story. and because of just how central it is to the guilt that Eraserhead is feeling, it is drawn and depicted in a way which is very realistic, very true to form. It is not cartoonish, it is not stylized, because for him, ultimately, it's tied to some very negative memories. The other issue that I have is I'm not a fan of the black space between the panels when we get into flashback sequences. Like, I get why it's there. It ultimately conveys a rather dour tone and ultimately reflects the deeper mental state, I suppose, of Eraserhead, but also is a clear indicator of here we are in the past without resorting to the, like, blurry backgrounds and what have you that you get usually when you have flashbacks in TV shows and stuff. But I don't like it. It feels as though it is really suffocating some of the artwork, even though it doesn't really interfere with the artwork. And it does feel like a massive waste of ink to me. Like, I mean, no wonder this particular volume was just so expensive with just how much ink they spent on it. But nonetheless, beyond all of that stuff, I have no real negatives with this one. So with that said, let's get into the overview and say that I think this is a bloody well put together episode. Like, it's just brilliantly well. I know that I haven't really mentioned the structure of it, but I think this is one of those cases where it just works so well that talking about structure and pacing feels redundant. Whilst I don't think this episode is any longer than the previous ones we've had, it feels as though it covers significantly more ground, and does so in a way which doesn't feel like it overstays its welcome, and yet sets us up for, or at least sets me up for really wanting to read the next one. I really do love this one, and I love the deeper elements to it. I want to see how this evolves and how it goes. There is a neat little thing I did notice as I was just finishing off writing this review, which is that I wonder, is the cat that Midnight is stroking with the panel that we see here, and is that the stray that Eraserhead saved, or rather the Cloud guy saved in the past? You know, maybe it is, because it has a similar kind of design, but you know, the future present version of it is a lot more cartoony and less detailed. But again, as I said, it's less detailed because it's not really a focus of anything. But hey, you know, fans have been wanting to see her stroking her pussy for some time, so there we have it. Demonetized! As though this channel's ever getting monetized anytime soon before the end of the world. Nonetheless, with all that said and done, however, let's get into Comment Corner! It's time for Comment Corner. Time to read the comment for this video. Once again, it's Big X1. One of these days, I'll have a proper jingle done for this, and it'll be done professionally, and it won't just be me very early in the morning doing all of this. Anyway, here's a comment from Big X1 that says, "This chapter is a good way to end the Sky Egg arc." This, of course, referring to last week's episode, and you aren't ready for what comes next. Thank you for your comment, and whilst I am about an episode ahead of the reviews at the moment, I'm not that far ahead, but I've got a feeling I know what they're referring to. That's not because of spoilers or anything, it's just me using my deductive reasoning. I've been playing a lot of video games that require a lot of deductive reasoning recently. Now watch me be horribly, horribly wrong. In any case, let me know what you thought about this particular episode in the comment section down below. Thank you all for listening, thank you all for watching, and see you next time. Goodbye!
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!